Thanks so much, Jen. Thanks, Yvonne, for helping set this up. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And special shout out to my friend, Steve Perry. I did not know he was a grandfather today. So, Jen, thanks for announcing that. That was fun to hear. I am here to talk about statistics in the MLS, as well as how you can use our partner product Remine. This is a product you already have access to. It's part of your MLS subscription. Everything I show you in Remine is going to be included. It's not something you have to pay anything additional for. And I do, like every virtual live CE class, we do have some kind of hoops you're going to have to jump through to earn CE, but I'll talk about those in just a moment. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? Looking for nods. There we go. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so my intro to every class always includes a shout out to our support team. Please make sure you are reaching out to them when you need help, whether it's a simple question or you need someone to walk you through every step of a CMA. We have an option for you. Live chat is great for simple questions. Email and phone are a little better for those more in-depth questions. You can even register for one-on-one training sessions. Currently, those are lasting about 20 minutes. We're holding those on Mondays, and you can find those training sessions under the help section in trainings and classes. So there's just so many ways we want to reach you and help you through your use of the MLS. There is no reason you should be experiencing feeling in the dark. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you need a little additional training or even some one-on-one help, we're there for you. MLS News is where we let you know what we've been up to as a team. So this is where we will notify you of changes to the MLS system, specifically new features, things you can start to leverage in using your and use in your business. So definitely make sure you are paying attention to MLS News. If you have 100 notifications, I really do understand. Just open it up, read the last like 2 or 3, and then follow it from there. That's been my advice for a long time. When these start to get out of control, open it up, look at 1 or 2 of them, and then just keep track of it from there. Now we actually have 4 residential partner products, and even though we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into Remine today, I want to make sure you know about the other 3 as well. So all of these products are part of your MLS membership. You have, as we speak, a basic subscription to Showing Time for the MLS. You have a basic subscription to Remine. You have a basic subscription to List Track and Cloud CMA. Now, Showing Time for the MLS is this really basic link on a listing. So as a buyer's agent, you can click on that link and say when you'd like to show that listing. As a listing agent, you'll be notified of those requests by text message or phone call or email or all of the above. So it's a really slick way to really streamline that communication process between agents and make it easier to schedule those showings. Remine is what we're going to talk about today in addition to statistics. This example on the screen here is one neighborhood. Remine's goal is to allow you to target an area and learn more about that area, to actually collect data about the properties, the people that own them, and even the people that live in them. So we're seeing different layers here on the screen, such as which properties were paid for in cash, where the Airbnbs are located, how long the property's been owned, and so on. So it's all about data collection, which is why I like to couple it with my statistics class. Now, List Track is the ability to see how your listings are performing online. So it follows your listings from the MLS to all the other places they go, like IDX websites, UtahRealEstate.com, other syndication partners like Zillow and Realtor.com. And it reports back to you how you're doing. It lets you know which websites are performing best for you, which zip codes are performing best for you, whether you had slow days or days with a lot of views. So it's really about understanding how you're generating interest for your listing. And you can even compare the interest you're generating to your average competition and share that with your client as well. And then finally, Cloud CMA, which obviously doesn't, the example I have doesn't want to load for us. Hopefully it will in a minute here, but Cloud CMA is all about creating CMAs from start to finish, but what they really excel at is your CMA presentation. There we go. So your CMA presentation can be aided through Cloud CMA. It makes you look really good. It furthers your branding. It does all of these things that will be a benefit and can help communicate the importance of a professional CMA and your own professionalism to your potential clients. So if you're not familiar with any partner products, you'll learn about Remine at least today. But I would choose one that piques your interest, or if you're only using one or two of these, pick the next one you think you could start leveraging in your business, start adding to your kind of day-to-day workload, if you will, and come to a webinar about it, or visit us for Cloud CMA in a month when we talk CMAs and Cloud CMA. I think Yvonne and I established that was going to be on November 12th. So there's a lot of ways to learn about these. Make sure you're familiar with them. And it's okay not to have, you don't have to jump into all of them at once. It's okay to take your time and just learn about them as you think you can implement them. Now, to qualify for CE credit, we want you here for at least 90% of the 60 minutes that I'll be gabbing about statistics. We got started around 10:10. So I'm fine if you guys are fine with going until 11:10 for CE. If you're not here for CE, you're just here for information, go ahead and sit back and relax. It's totally fine to just get the information. That's what I want you to be here for ultimately. But for the CE, you'll need to be here for 90%. I know Yvonne has asked that you be on camera and stay for the duration, but I'm also going to give out 5 code words throughout the class. I'm hoping you'll be able to get me 4 of those by email for CE. That's kind of the individual agreement we at the MLS made with the Division of Real Estate back in March for offering CE. So I'll be giving 5 code words throughout the class. I don't expect you to be a robot. It's okay to only get 4 of those, but you'll send them to the email training@utahrealestate.com when we're done. And that's just kind of an added measure for tracking that you're here with us and you haven't fallen asleep. So with that, I am going to move out of my PowerPoint here and I'm going to move into the MLS system. So here we are on the dashboard of the MLS. You should all be familiar with this. We are going to focus on the statistics tools available under the statistics tab, and then we'll move on to using Remine. Now, the easiest way to access any of our partner products, there is a commercial partner product as well, is from the left-hand side of the dashboard here. So we'll revisit Remine a little bit later in the class. But for now, we're going to start with statistics. And while it might not be as flashy as Remine, I have always been a firm believer that the statistics are the best way to buoy up and support your conversations with your clients. The more you understand about the way the market has been moving and performing and changing, the more you can convey to your client just how much of a market professional you really are. And you're going to have some clients who really respond to statistics. They're going to ask you for a graph. They're going to want to see a table of data. Other clients, that's not really going to be of interest to them. But you'll still have that background knowledge. And even if they're not particularly data driven, you can still explain how the market is moving and changing. So it's just all about enriching your conversations and making sure you are as informed as possible when it comes to being that market expert. So you have 6 tools to choose from inside the MLS system, and they all bring something a little bit different. I do think there's a few that are particularly relevant to right now. I had a pretty different focus in my statistics classes before 2020 because we had a market that, well, the market is always changing. We were really in a market that changed with a little more, I hate to say the word predictability because I'm not an economist. I'm not here to predict what the market's going to do. I never have been, but I think it was a little more steady. It was a little more stable. That's kind of the word I'm looking for. These days, our market has changed drastically many times over the course of this year, sometimes virtually overnight. In fact, I'm going to show you a statistic that we are hand selecting. We actually have our development team going into the back end of the MLS. This is not something you could generate yourself through one of our statistics tools, and reporting it on our COVID-19 website. The easiest way to get there is to click on it on the dashboard. Now, every statistic you can see here, you can pull yourself, and I'm going to show you how to pull the stats yourself. But the one I'm talking about, and I'm sorry, statistics usually includes quite a bit of scrolling. I know it's kind of dizzy making, but bear with me here. We're scrolling down to the very bottom because this is a stat you could not find yourself. I can't pull it. I tried. I did try to pull it before our team started working on it themselves. But I think this is really important to illustrate just how abruptly the market changed and how abruptly we started kind of making up for that change, if you will. So this is what's called back to market listings. These are listings that were under contract in any given week, starting in January all the way up to the last week in September. And we were looking at how many listings were under contract that ended up back in the active status. So there was a deal and it fell through. Now, as you can see at the beginning of the year, we were hovering around 150 to 200 a week. And it was pretty steadily, slowly, easily rising to about 250. Well, starting at the beginning of March and then into mid-March, we started doubling that. So we see this huge spike in mid-March. Not surprising at all to me that that's when we see that anomaly. But just as quickly as that started, it came right back down to levels that were very consistent with what we were seeing before. In fact, you could probably draw a straight line from the beginning of the year to now, and the only true deviation from that line is going to be what happened in mid-March. So this is one way you could see just how spooked our markets got, for lack of a better term, which actually reminds me about our code words. I'm going to give you your first one. I thought it would be fun to have like a Halloween theme. I'm rolling my eyes at myself. Your first code word is shadow. I think of those videos of kids being afraid of their own shadow. If you've never visited that side of YouTube, it's a fun time. Anyway,
Molly, can I just interject right here while you're giving the code word?
Yes.
There's about 5 people that do not have their videos on, and if I remember correctly, you don't allow them to get credit either if they don't have their videos on. So please turn them on, and your first and last names, please.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yvonne's helping me it's hard to do MLS, talk statistics, and watch for cameras. So Yvonne's on that for me. Thank you. Okay, so let's get back to the MLS system. I highly recommend continuing to follow the COVID-19 website specifically for some of those stats that you wouldn't really be able to find on your own, or the ease of the stats you can pull on your own, but they're just very easy to look at on that more static page. Now, I recommend focusing on the home sales graph, the sales per month report, and the daily snapshot report. And I'm going to start with those so we can have plenty of time with them. And then we'll kind of gauge where we're at. If we need to move over to Remine, we will, or perhaps I'll go into some detail about the absorption report, because let's be honest, it's the hardest one to understand on your own. It took me a really long time to figure out what was going on that page. So we might spend some time with that if we get time. But I want to focus on home sales graph, sales per month, and daily snapshot, because I think the two at the bottom, the sales per month and the daily snapshot, those are going to be the most relevant to today's market. And the reason I feel this way is because market changes and market shifts and influences are going to be seen there the soonest. And here's why. Almost all of the stats in the MLS are going to be showing you sold information. There's a reason for that. When a listing is marked as sold, that is final information. It's hard and fast. It's a fact. That's the sales price. That's how long it took to sell, and so on. When listings are in other statuses, it can be a little harder to pin down the facts. List price will fluctuate. The status it's in will fluctuate. It might be inactive one day and then off market the next because they're painting and they can't have any showings, and then back to active and goes to backup because it's under contract, but they still want to do showings, and so on. The daily snapshot report helps us to capture the performance of those statuses, the active status, the backup status, the under contract status, these statuses that are not hard and fast the way sold status is. So in addition to simply being able to see statuses we would otherwise have a hard time capturing, the daily snapshot report also helps us see daily changes. So rather than looking at the sales cycle, which can be 30 days or longer, we can see market changes really quickly when we are looking at active status and under contract status. So that's the daily snapshot report. Sales per month report is going to focus on those sales, but it's going to focus on it in a monthly time frame rather than something else like quarterly or year to date, like you might find in quarterly comparison and some of these other options. So those are the two that's going to show us changes in the market the soonest, and where we've had a really unpredictable market, these are especially relevant. Now, I really like home sales graph, especially because we're not far at all from the end of the third quarter. So the information in the home sales graph is really relevant when we get close to the end of the fourth quarter, but we still don't really have fourth quarter information. I wouldn't rely so heavily on home sales graph, but it is really relevant, and it's probably the best tool to share with the client because it's so easy for them to understand. It's by far our most visual report. And for a lot of your clients, being visual is going to be a preferred method of learning this kind of information. So let's start there. I'm going to open the home sales graph. And I want to keep this relevant to everybody. So my search criteria will be broad. I'm going to use Utah County. But notice how you can get a lot more specific than that. You can only look at certain styles or property types. Maybe I'm not interested in understanding how the single family properties in Utah County are moving. I just want to know about the condos or the townhomes, or vice versa. I'm working with single family homes, and so I'm not really interested in the performance of condo and townhomes. So there's a lot you can do. You can use the map to get more specific with location. You can even choose whether or not you want to include new builds, or if you only want to look at resale, or again, vice versa. If you only want to look at new construction and not focus on resale, you can use construction status for that. And I've already forgotten exactly where you'll find that. It's under the site section of the search page. You could specify, okay, I only want to look at the statistics for built standing properties, or I only want to look at under construction, or I only want to look at to be built, or I want to look at all three, which in that case, you could just leave it be. But you can combine them, you can isolate them. There's a lot you can do with your search criteria. So again, I'm keeping it broad for the sake of relevance to everyone here, but you can get very specific, which of course will really help your client understand how the information is particularly relevant to them. So as always, the stats take a little bit longer to generate than your typical listing search. But here we are looking at our results, and I want to point out that the search criteria is listed at the top. This is especially helpful if you tend to do several searches in a row, or you like to use new tab, which is the ability to do more than one thing at the same time. I will frequently pull a statistic and look at Utah County in one tab and Salt Lake County in the other, or Lehigh in one tab compared to all of Utah County in the other tab. And that yellow, albeit it's a little ugly, that yellow bar is really important because it's showing me exactly what these numbers are referring to, which in this case is Utah County. You also have the ability across the top, of course, to go back to your search and change it. My favorite option, which is export. This is the ability to export these numbers into a spreadsheet. Now, I choose Excel because I have the Excel program, but there's a lot of spreadsheet types you can choose from depending on the program you have available. And you can export these numbers. That's a much easier way for some of us to work with numbers, is to work with them in a spreadsheet rather than the more static view of the MLS. You can also print this report or email it as a PDF, and both of those options will be great for sharing with clients. Now, if we look at our results, we have median sold price in blue, we have total number of homes sold in black, and we have total number of homes listed in green. And I'm actually going to select total number of homes listed and total number of homes sold. I'm deselecting these just temporarily so we can isolate median sold price and we can look at these figures on their own. Now, 5 years ago in Utah County, the median sales price was $229,000. Now, when I say median instead of average, I quite literally mean, median literally means that half of the properties in Utah County 5 years ago sold for $229,000 or less. Half the properties sold for $229,000 or less. Can you even find anything for $229,000 anymore? These days, the median sales price is $360,000. So essentially $130,000 increase in just 5 years. So this is a significant jump. This is great news for someone who already owns property and has held onto it for a couple of years. And of course, we're talking about aggregate data. We're talking about a collection of information. So not everyone that's owned a property for 5 years is going to have $130,000 of equity. That's not how that works, of course, but it's good news. A first-time home buyer might be made more nervous by this information, but there's so many ways we can talk about it positively because, again, it's still good news. We want home values to be increasing. This is absolutely going in the right direction. A conversation about how quickly it's going in that direction is a totally different conversation, but we want people to be building equity. This is good news. This could also be a conversation for a first-time home buyer about urgency, about not waiting. Maybe you worked with someone 5 years ago who was worried about those prices, but now they're really glad they bought 5 years ago. They're glad they bought last year or the year before. So it can absolutely be a really positive conversation, even for someone who's made a little more nervous by these prices. Now, every statistics tool can be switched from median to average. We kind of default to median, and I'll explain why in just a second, but there is nothing wrong with switching to average. In fact, most of your clients will probably be more comfortable with average as a statistical type. It's part of our common way of speaking. It's something we're all a little more familiar with. So if you intend to share it with a client, or maybe you're here because you are curious to compare your own statistic searches to something you heard in the news or something like that, you would probably want to switch to average, which you can very easily do. Now, the real difference is, and it's going to be a lot easier to visualize it if we think about like 10 homes in one neighborhood instead of, you know, these however many homes are represented here. I'm sure hundreds of thousands. So if we think about one neighborhood that had 10 sales in the last year, and 9 of those homes sold for something like $350,000, and the 10th home sold for like $1 million plus. It's this sprawling estate, and you know, they have like a 10-car garage and a basketball, I don't know, you know, one of those properties. That's going to be a bit of an outlier price. Everything else sold for around $350,000, and that 10th property sold for a really high price. Or on the flip side, maybe it's barely worth the land it sits on and it sold at a really low price. Median is going to take the prices and put them in order from least to greatest or greatest to least, and split it right down the middle, like the median in a road. That's your median. So in our example, the median would be $350,000. Average is going to add those prices together. So it's going to take the 9 properties that sold for $350,000 and add, you know, a really large number or maybe a really small number, that outlier, and it's going to divide it by 10. So average tends to be slightly more influenced by those outlier prices, but they are both correct. I have to drive that point home. They are both correct. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to median or average. It really comes down to personal preference as well as what you think your client will want to hear about. They're just 2 different ways of assessing the same data. Now, let me give you your second code word, which is haunted. Your second code word is haunted, like a haunted house, which I don't even know if those are open this year. I don't know if anyone's seen like haunted attractions or haunted cord mazes. Maybe they're open.
It's open.
They're open. Good news. Okay. I'll have to go check some out. You guys might be catching on to the fact that I'm a really big fan of Halloween. Okay, so now I've deselected sold price, and we're looking at number of homes sold and number of homes listed. And actually, to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to remove first quarter and fourth quarter information, and let's just focus on second and third for a little bit. It's going to do some thinking. You can probably see the spinning wheel in the upper left-hand corner there. So I'll give it a second to kind of think about that. But I think we had a really interesting second and third quarter, and the deviations were pretty obvious in my opinion. So here's our sales in the black line, and this is for second and third quarter going back 5 years. Then you have your listings, second and third quarter also going back 5 years. Now, in the second quarter of 2019, there were just shy of 3,000 sales. And in the second quarter of last year, there were 4,300 new listings. This year, there were only 3,900 new listings in the second quarter. And the sales also were only to 2,900, so about the same as the sales in the second quarter of 2019. However, we just outdid ourselves in the third quarter this year. Highest number of sales for any second or third quarter going back 5 years. And I would argue, though I don't see it right here in front of me, I'm sure that's true of all the quarters going back 5 years. So highest number of sales in a single quarter for at least 5 years. However, look what our listings did. We had 3,900 new listings hit the market in the second quarter and only 3,600 in the third. So look at this relationship between what we're selling and what's coming onto the market and replenishing the inventory. Now, you didn't need to come to a statistics class today to hear that the inventory was low. You probably know that already. But it's really interesting to see part of what's driving that and just how close the relationship has gotten between new listings and sales. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the fourth quarter. We still have obviously a lot of time that's going to pass before we're sure if this is going to be, you know, a pattern that remains or if things are going to take a shift and change again. It's really hard to say, but I think that's really interesting to see just how unusual third quarter was this year. Now, let's go ahead and skip to the sales per month report. We're going to stick with our same search criteria, which is just Utah County. But I want to point out the performance we had in the third quarter, a little bit like what we've already been talking about, but this is breaking it down monthly. So we see which month we are seeing represented. We see the count, that's the number of sales, the sales volume. Then you have median original list price versus median sold price, and essentially how those two compare. So you see a percentage for our sellers getting what they're asking, our buyers making, you know, full offers, are they getting away with low ball offers, what's kind of the situation there. Then you have median square footage. That doesn't really change over time. Median price per square foot does, of course. So this is like a slightly different way of looking at median price. Median price per square foot in Utah County was around 100, 105 5 years ago, and it's now 155. Same amount of square footage, but a lot more value for those individual square feet. Median beds, baths, again, doesn't really change much with time, and then median CDOM, which has been just about as unusual as our sales count. So let's look at a typically fast time of year, which would be like March, April, and May. So March of 2019 saw 780 sales, April saw 905, May saw 1,073. If we look at those same months this year, March, April, and May, March had 868 sales. So we didn't really see too much of an influence yet in sales numbers in the month of March, but we definitely started to see that in April. So April of 2019 saw 905 sales, whereas April of 2020 saw only 764. So that gap is kind of starting to widen at this point. The gap between the performance last year in the same time frame and the sales performance this year. Then May saw 930. So May did see more sales than April, but last year there was a 1,073. So definitely kind of underperforming the previous year. But then June absolutely blew June of 2019 out of the water. So June of 2019 didn't quite see 1,000 sales, whereas June of this year was over 1,200. So we started really making up for some of that scare that was kind of going on in the market in the month of June. Then July saw 1,272 sales, whereas July of last year saw just 1,133. So we definitely started to make up for some of that, some of the lagging sales in those other months. In fact, for the entire MLS, and by the way I found this out was this exact report, the sales per month report. In the entire MLS, we saw more sales in the month of June than any other month in MLS history. It was a record month for sales. MLS history, by the way, goes back 24 plus years, back to 1996, and counting. So for a long, long time, we'd never had that many sales. And then July beat that. So we had these two record-breaking months in June and July this year. So pretty interesting to see. Obviously, a lot still remains to be seen, and we'll just keep watching these stats and see what happens. August of last year saw 1,100 sales. August of this year saw 1,150 roughly. So a little bit more again this year. September was significantly higher at almost 1,100 sales, whereas September of last year had only 891. So again, we're seeing these really interesting leaps. The same thing can be seen with CDOM cumulative days on market was in the 20s. May, June, July, August last year, reached the 30s in September and October. This year, in the teens for sure, nearly single digits in August and single digits in September. Now it's possible there's still sales that need to be reported for the end of September that haven't been yet, but I would say around this time of the month, these stats are getting pretty stable. So single digits in September compared to 32 days. So barely more than a week compared to the same month last year, which had about a month's worth of cumulative days on market. So, okay. Yvonne, I'm counting on you to help me watch the chat and just let me know if there's questions I should address that come up. Does that work for you? Oh, I can't hear you.
You're on mute. Yvonne, you've been on mute. I can hear you from the other room.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry.
That's okay.
Brandon would ask, is there a way to display the sales price as a comparison to list price, where it shows the actual percentage, not medium, of homes where the final sales price is over original list price? My hope is to see the comparison between my price range as well. For example, how many homes in the 200K to 400K range are selling for more than their list price?
That's a really good question. So you can switch from median to average, like with the other statistics, but that would just mean your average, that would just compare the average list price to the average sold price. What you probably should do is get more specific with your search criteria than I've done. That would be my recommendation, including to get more specific with that price point. So with list price, you can specify, that 400,000 to 500,000 or so range. And maybe you get more specific with a neighborhood or something like that. And that should draw a better, I would say that would make a better comparison between the median original list and the median sold when you're dealing with a little less data that's a little more relevant to a particular client. So I can't do exactly, I wish we could. I can't do exactly what you're aiming to do, but I think you can get really close.
Okay, we have one more question. This is from Minette. Where do we find the stats for back to market?
Yes, so that's going to be on the COVID-19 website, which you can find on the dashboard of the MLS. So if I just click on the logo here, it's going to take me to, once it does its thinking, it's going to take me to the dashboard. I can click on the COVID-19 website, open the stats, and scroll to the bottom. So they're kind of like buried a little bit, but the steps are pretty easy. Just COVID-19 website, market stats, and scroll to the bottom. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful comments and questions. Now, let's go ahead and have our third code word. The code word is spider. I'm petrified of spiders. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. Petrified. Let's have a look at the sales per month report. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what we were just looking at. Daily snapshot. Daily snapshot is what I want. Now, when you go to the daily snapshot, you're probably going to think that there isn't a tremendous amount of value here. And I would agree with you until you find out about one feature. That was my experience. I think it's interesting to see that the difference in actives from October 14th last year to compared with October 14th this year is a 58% decrease. Here's the thing. I can tell you this is not a result of a kind of a a funky day in the MLS because I've looked at more data. But if we're only looking at 2 days worth of information, that doesn't give us a lot of data to work with. For instance, I cannot guarantee that 5,000 or so agents didn't just mark their listings under contract, and another 5,000 agents just haven't logged into the MLS and listed their new listings in the system yet today. So my point is, a single day's worth of information isn't the most reliable option. Switch from a date to a date range. This is going to give you the ability to understand the performance of active status, backup status, under contract, et cetera, over time. So suddenly it stops being a really micro conversation about just 2 days worth of data, and we start to see patterns. So I'm going to take this back to maybe like July. Hopefully this doesn't gum up the system too much. Sometimes when I bring a lot of data into this report, it thinks for a really long time. We're going to keep our fingers crossed. We're going to stick with our criteria of Utah County, and I'm going to update the report. Now it tells me here it's waiting for the report. So we'll give it a few seconds, maybe a hair more than that. But my goal ultimately in pulling this report is so I can see active, backup, under contract status, how these statuses have been performing over time. So again, it's harder to capture under contract status. It's harder to capture active status and backup because these are fluid statuses. They come and they go and they come and they go. And so rather than sold, we have to kind of look at it as a function of time, if that's a decent way to put it. So we can understand how those statuses have really been performing. Because a single snapshot, it's interesting. And it's usually consistent with a more, across the board pattern, but you can't guarantee it until you switch to that date range. So here we are, Utah County, looking at actives. Selected range quite literally refers back to what I entered here, which is July of this year to today's date, October 14th of this year. So this year is in blue, last year is in black. So not only has it been consistent day over day over day that we have this really big spread between the number of active listings we used to have last year at the same time and the number of active listings we now have, but that difference is growing, if you can see that. So at the beginning of July, we started July with a pretty big spread between what we might have been able to expect if we were in a market like last year and this year. And that has only grown. Last year, the number of active properties stayed pretty steady throughout July, August, September, and half of October. This year in Utah County, and I can say across the state, we have seen a consistent decline in the number of active listings until the spread between actives last year and the spread between actives this year in October is even wider than it was in July. Now, I'm going to skip back up for just a second, and instead we're going to look at under contract. This is almost the inverse, okay? This year is higher in our number of under contracts, whereas last year was lower, and this year has stayed pretty steady in our number of under contract listings per day, whereas last year was declining in under contracts moving into September, October, and we'll have to see about November, but it's really interesting to see that. So clearly there's a relationship between how many properties we're constantly putting under contract and how few properties we have available on the market. But I also want to remind you that we did see fewer new listings in the third quarter than we had even in the second quarter, which is relatively typical to have your second quarter be higher in the number of new listings than third quarter. However, we did see fewer new listings in the third quarter this year than we did last, and that really surprised me. I expected for second quarter to kind of you know, underperform in those categories, and then both sales and new listings would really take a jump. But sales took a jump where new listings didn't, and it's just very interesting. So there's definitely more than one thing going on here, but under contract is, and how many listings we are putting under contract is definitely a big influence. Backup is interesting to me. This is the first time. Yes,
I
Yvonne.
have a question from Wento. So he says, I clicked on the report view and it gave me a graph view, which showed a better depiction of the action. What's your thoughts on that?
So you can, most of these you can switch. I'm not seeing where this particular report can be switched to a graph instead of a line view. I know the single dates can be switched to a line view, or I'm sorry, a graph view. I think it just depends on personal preference with that. If it is a little bit easier for you to read a different view, then I would absolutely go with that view. Does anybody see that option for? I just don't see it, and I don't often switch from the default. I should. This is a good reminder that I should be doing a little more digging as far as display and changing how I'm looking at things. But when you see those options, absolutely take advantage of them, and I say use what you prefer.
Yeah, that dealt more with the sales per month report, you know, where it gave the graph of all of the line items and things. Switching over to a graph view was a lot better than trying to read through all the numbers. That's all I was saying. Thanks.
Oh, no, thank you, Wendell. That's good information, and those options are available throughout a lot of the reports. So watch for that, because it can really help to understand the data you're looking at. So great comment. So this surprises me about backup. I hadn't actually seen backup status specific to Utah County yet. And so it's interesting to me, we did have far more backup status listings until they started to kind of converge this year and last year. And now they're pretty comparable. This year overall, we definitely have more backup status listings. But we also saw a decline in backup status in September that we only sort of saw last year. So kind of interesting to see that. Okay, I don't want to lose time, too much time to talk Remine. I get really excited about stats. So I can just go on and on and on, but I'm switching now to the dashboard. I'm also going to change my little work as here and work as myself. So I'm going to open Remine. It's going to say, okay, you're going to a different program. And it's going to allow me to not only go into the Remine system, but it logs me in. So here's my name. Here's my information. I'm on the starter plan. You will also be on the starter plan. No, I don't actually recommend you spend your money. I'm a huge fan of taking advantage of all you have included and nothing more unless you're just really driven to it. So stick with the starter plan like I'm going to do, and you'll be able to do everything I'm able to do in Remine, everything I show you. So it starts me off in the daily section. Guys, I'll be honest, I find a lot of Remine's latest features and a lot of these tabs to be really fluffy. What I mean by that is they don't bring a lot of value. I wouldn't spend a lot of time in Remine on the daily section. I wouldn't spend a lot of time in chat, for instance, which is where you can literally just chat back and forth with other agents using Remine. I'm just going to text you, you know? So I want you to focus on search and carts. That is the meat of Remine. That's the value of Remine. I'll say it again, search and carts. Okay, that's my recommendation. We're gonna focus in on the most helpful, most valuable pieces of this tool. So let's start with search. I'm going to use search to find opportunities or potential opportunities. and I'm going to use carts to act on those opportunities. Carts is a word that actually a lot of MLSs across the country use. And so for MLS users, it tends to be a very familiar word. For us here in Utah, it's not a word we've ever used in our MLS system. So it sounds like you're going to buy something. It's actually like a collection of information. It's kind of like saving listings. It's kind of similar to that. So search is where you find opportunities. Carts is where you act on them. So here we are in search. It's starting me in Salt Lake. You can search an address, a city, a zip code, your own home, wherever you want to do business. Is this somewhere you're already working? Is this somewhere you're trying to break into? Is it a little of both? Where do you want to learn more about the people, the properties, and the people that live in them in this area? So choose an area and go there. I'll stick with what I'm looking at here. And these groupings are just showing me where some of the properties are. So I'm going to simply zoom in on an area. Now, once you start to see individual buildings, they will be populated with a blue dot. Now, a blue dot is an individual parcel. And from here, I get to use layers to almost turn this view into something like a heat map. It's going to show me basic information about these properties and help me identify those opportunities. So let's start with my favorite. I'm scrolling through this list, clear down to the bottom, and I'm going to cash buyers. This is my very favorite option. Every single one of these green flags is an indicator that this property was paid for in cash. And if this is an area where I want to do business, these are folks I want to know about. So those are my cash buyers. I also have mortgage age, okay? So I can choose to focus on those owners that have, you know, a more new mortgage, maybe a mortgage with some more years on it, or I can even look at properties that have no mortgage, which is that really dark green category. Now, it might be hard to see. Let me zoom in a little bit so you folks can see a little bit better. Notice how some of these dark green properties do not have a cash buyer flag, which means obviously at some point they had a mortgage, they just no longer do. Some of the cash buyer flags don't have that dark green. So they originally paid cash and have since taken out a mortgage. Ultimately, both of these categories are people with buying power, or likely to be people with buying power. They're just a little bit different, and I may choose to kind of target them together, or I may even separate them. For my cash buyers, I'm going to send a particular message about my business, and then to the no mortgage folks, I'm going to send a slightly different message. But if we're not getting that specific and you're just here to find out whose doors you're knocking on, these might be the doors. Do you know what I'm saying? So it depends on your own marketing efforts and what you intend to do with your marketing, but everyone has a marketing limitation, whether it's budget, time, both. And so when you only have a certain amount of hours in the day, a certain number of marketing dollars, this is going to help you identify who you want to spend that money and time on, okay? Now, let's just look at the layers you have available. Now, some of these layers are not a part of the starter plan, but when you look at an individual property, you can still see that information there. So there you go. So don't be spending your money. The cart layer is simply those properties I've put into a cart at some point, okay? So if you're a brand new user, nothing's gonna show up with your cart layer, and that's totally fine. Property value and home equity will only be seen on the property card. If I click on them, it's going to say upgrade to pro. Don't do that, okay? Instead, if you want to see that information about a property, you can click on an individual property. Remine will open what's known as the property card. And on an individual property, instead of the map, you'll be able to see those details that you can't see on the map. Okay, so there's an example of what the individual property card looks like. By the way, your fourth code word is lantern. like holding, you know, I picture someone holding up a lantern in the dark to see. Your fourth code word is lantern. They had to be Halloween themed, but they couldn't be too obvious. Okay, so property value and home equity will only be on the property card. Ownership time is available. I'm actually going to remove the cash buyer flag because it's kind of getting in the way. Ownership time is available. Again, this is kind of grouping those listings by how long they've been owned, so you can identify, you know, you're probably going to have a different conversation or send a different message to the homeowner that's only owned their property for a couple of years than you are to the homeowner that's been there for a long time. You can even set your own ranges. So they've given me ranges like 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years. You could set your own. Like, I want to focus on people that have owned between 7 and 9 years, because in my neighborhood, people move every 8 years. I don't know. It's up to you. Once you hit apply, my colors are going to disappear. I'm no longer using it as a layer, like a visual representation. Now I'm using it as a filter. So notice how I only have a few blue dots left. These are the dots in this area. These are the properties in this area owned between 7 and 9 years. Those are 18 results, okay? And from here, it's hard from, oh, here we go. I need to move my Zoom controls. From here, I can add one of these properties to my cart. I could add all of these properties to carts, or I could even add a few. So if I wanted to include all 18 of these properties in this neighborhood that have been owned between 7 and 9 years, I would select all. I would choose cart, and it would have me either choose a cart I've already created or create a new cart. So if I wanted to create a new cart, I might say my neighborhood, 7 to 9 years. Okay. And then I would create that cart. Whoops. It didn't want to save that. And now I have a new cart with a very specific kind of homeowner. Okay. Sell score is Remine's predictive analytic. This is Remine's best guess as to whether or not someone might be interested in selling soon. So a high sell score is that person could be interested in selling soon. A low sell score is, look, they just refinanced. They're probably not selling anytime soon. And medium is in between. Absentee is a great piece of information. It is not available on the map, but again, it is going to be available on the individual property card. So on the property card, it has an absentee owner field, and it actually says no. If it were an absentee owner, it would say yes in bold red, and I could get both the address of the property and the mailing address of the owner. So with absentee properties, I might say I might send a postcard to the house that says something like, tired of renting? Did you know, blah, 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 you know, I can help you find a house. To the actual owner, I might send something like, ready to invest again. Okay, so it's all about helping to send the right message to the right person at the right time. Flood zone is also one of those pieces of information you'll only see on the property card. Building type and land use are great to kind of understand zoning, understand a little bit more about how the neighborhood kind of breaks down, where the single family homes are versus the multifamily homes or the condos. Airbnb is going to let me know where the Airbnbs are located and what they're going for. You also have mortgage rate, last sale price, and distress deals is another one of those pieces of information you'll only see on the property card. Now I'm going to give you the last code word, which is costume. The last code word is costume. But for those of you that want to stay and see, I'd like to simply show you the carts option. So I've shown you search. I've also shown you how to put opportunities into a cart. And now if I go to the carts tab, now I can work with those opportunities I've identified. Now I can select to look at all the properties I've put into any cart, or I can get more specific and look at those carts I've created. So my neighborhood, 7 to 9 years, here's the 18 properties I've added. I can select them all. I can export the data. So I can actually export the data into a spreadsheet and work with it elsewhere. I can, under the More option, I can print mailing labels. So this is the ability to print some very standard Avery size labels based on the properties you've identified. What a great way to quickly send mailers to these opportunities you've gathered through Remine. So even if you just use Remine to focus on those cash buyers in an area or people without a mortgage, I think you're getting value out of it, especially for a product that's already included in the MLS. So I want to thank you for coming. I'm sorry we did go a little bit over, but as long as you email me those code words, I'm going to put the email address back on the screen. As long as you email me those code words, I'll have your CE credit banked before the end of the day. Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks for being here and joining me for class.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. We will see you next month, and it will be CMA. Thank you.
I'll be here.
Love you.
Thank you.
Virtual hug.
Virtual hug.
Where do I stop?